My father just passed away in a very unfortunate accident. He got into a big argument with my stupid stepmother, and he stormed out of the house, and in a rage of fury, he was driving down the back mountain roads when it was pouring down rain, and I guess his anger must have got the best of him because he crashed. And he ended up in a coma, and he didn't make it. But that's not what today's story is about. That's just what led to what happened next. My stepmother is now trying to take my inheritance that he left for me. She's trying to get me kicked out of the house that I grew up in, and the only person in this entire world that can stop her is me. I'm 17 years of age, and my life is temporarily in the hands of my stepmother. This is my father's doing, but I don't resent him for it. I'm the only child of my parents who have passed away. My mother used to be a medical consultant in a big eye clinic while my father had a delivery company, which he had toiled for most part of his life to build. My parents were satisfied with just having a child, and though I sometimes wish that I had another sibling whom I could experience life together with, I'm equally grateful to my parents for dedicating all their lives to loving me. Well, life happens, and it happened to us. My mother, she passed away 3 years ago from a heart attack. The tragic loss of my mother hit my dad and me pretty hard. To say that we were devastated would be an understatement. It was during that period that I saw my stepmother. She was one of the sympathizers, and you would be surprised to hear that she used to be my late mother's colleagues. She sort of hung around after the funeral, and she tried to warm her way into my father's heart. I don't think my father loved her to start with because he never recovered from my mother's death, till he went to join her. You see, my father listened to the advice of some friends who advised him to settle down for at least my sake, as he needed a wife and I needed a mother. If only we could see the future when we would have probably dodged the human bullet, aka my stepmother, Madeline. My father asked Madeline to marry him, but he clearly told her that he was not willing to have kids, and he knew how important it was to her, since she did not have a child of her own. Madeline said that spending the rest of her life beside my father as his wife was the only thing that mattered to her, and I think that's utter lies. The marriage happened, and it was a small affair. There was no such thing as a honeymoon because the house, became hot right after the wedding. Now, I'm a girl in her teens, and even though I love and respect my parents, they equally accorded me a level of respect and freedom, and everyone got along just fine. But the moment my stepmother got into the picture, she wanted my father to choke the life out of me. She attempted to stir him up so that he would deny me certain privileges which have been given to me all my life. Thankfully, though, my father was never one to be manipulated so easily. Madeline was actually the person who had told my father to cancel their wedding trip, as she claimed that it was an unnecessary reason to spend money. You might praise her for doing that on the basis that she was trying to help him save money, right? But I strongly disagree. Let me tell you why. My father was doing his best to move on after losing his first wife, and if Madeline was sensitive enough, she would have known that a getaway trip was what my father needed at that moment. I kept my opinion to myself and did not interfere in their marriage, but that did not stop my stepmother from getting on my toes the very next day. I was in the house when the cleaner, who comes twice a week, showed up for work. She was about to start working when my stepmom walked in and asked her to leave. The cleaner looked at me with a surprised facade, and though I could not put a finger on why Madeline was asking the cleaner to leave, I asked her to come back the next day or some other time. The cleaner turned back to get her things and leave when Madeline told her that her services were no longer needed to be done. Neither the cleaner nor I understood what was going on, and we looked at her for a bit more clearance. You see, Madeline repeated what she said and emphasized that the cleaner services would no longer be needed. I felt that she wanted to take up the chores all by herself, so I told her that it was going to be too much on her, especially even if she could cope. It was too soon for her to start worrying about chores when her attention was supposed to be on my father. Madeline immediately looked at me like I was joking, and she said that she would rather die than lift a pin. I was confused and asked why she just fired the cleaner then, who had been lifting pins in the house on a weekly basis. Madeline said the cleaner was fired because I'm old enough to handle the chores around the home. It was a shocker, which I found disrespectful, and I did not hide my faults. I'm not lazy or whatever, but there was no way I would do the whole thing which the cleaner did. So, I told my stepmom that there's no way on this earth that it was going to happen, and she began to raise her voice at me. I told her to quit shouting at me, as I found it disrespectful and would not take it from her, but she only increased her tone. Well, my father rushed out to see what was going on, and Madeline immediately began to tell him how badly he and my late mother had raised me. I've been trying to not be disrespectful. All the while she thundered, but the moment she brought my mother into the scene, well, I talked back to her and said that she knew nothing about child training and she never had a child of her own. Madeline attempted to slap me, but my father got in between us, and he asked me to never disrespect his wife anymore and demanded that I go into my room. Well, as I stormed into my room, I could hear my stepmom nagging about how my father, rather than properly discipline me for disrespecting her, had just let me off the hook. My father, he comes into my room later that evening and had a lengthy chit-chat. He told me that he had told his wife to learn to live with and love me. He told me that he was not going to turn his back on me simply because he had remarried, but he pleaded that I equally learn to tolerate my stepmom as she was his wife, and disrespecting her meant that I was indirectly disrespecting him. I promised my father I would do my utmost best not to make trouble in the house, but noted that he equally needs to talk to his wife to respect my boundaries. My father noted that he had done so and the cleaner was going to be retained. The drama which took place the day after my father's wedding was the first of many. Madeline held on to what I had said that day about her not knowing anything about raising a child, because she did not have any children of her own, and she began to disturb my father about adopting a baby. As you can imagine, this caused a serious issue between them because my father had earlier noted that he was done with childbearing. Madeline had earlier claimed that spending the rest of her life beside my father as his wife was all that mattered to her, so why was she so intent on adopting a child simply because of something which I said during our argument? Well, guys, Madeline continued to raise dust about the child adoption issue, and she even started the adoption process without my father giving his consent. This action made my dad mad, and it was the first time that I had ever seen my father this angry. They seriously argued that afternoon, and my father just had to storm out of the house to avoid hitting her. Yeah, I witnessed all the drama, but I did not interfere. It was 20 minutes after my father had left the house that we received a call to rush down to the hospital where my father was admitted. He just got into an accident. My stepmother and I put our differences aside and rushed down to the hospital where my father was found comatose. The moment I saw my father in such a state of unconsciousness, I wanted to attack my stepmom right then and there, because if she had not gone behind him to initiate the adoption process, then they would not have argued, and he would not be in the hospital. Things did not get better when my dad has passed on 3 days later. I lack the words to describe my feelings at this point. Only one person is to be blamed for my father's untimely death, and that person is Madeline. He died just a few months after his wedding, and my father's funeral took place later than it was supposed to, and this was because Madeline wanted it so. He's been buried 2 days after his death, but Madeline had the funeral fixed for 2 months later. I asked her why my father's funeral was taking so much time, and she said it's on purpose, because she wants to honor my father's dying wish. I did not understand what she meant because my father never said a word once he got into a coma, so where did the dying wish thing come from? Well, I mean, what could a 17-year-old do anyways? I just allowed Madeline to go ahead and do her thing. After all, she was the legal wife to my father. My father's funeral, it finally took place, and I saw the reason why Madeline had delayed it all. She attended my father's funeral with a 2-year-old boy, and flaunted him as their adopted baby. And her late husband, well, according to her, she and my father had begun the adoption process before he died. She claimed that she was honoring him by going ahead to fulfill his wish even though he was no more. Sympathizers, including my grandparents who had come from the countryside to witness the funeral of their son, fell for the story. But I did not. There was no way all she was saying could be true because my father's death came as a result of her wanting to adopt a child. Just after we paid our respect to my father's memory, Madeline got so interested in the reading of the will. The will was read last week, and Madeline was present with my father's 2-year-old dying wish, Jackson. The lawyer started off by announcing that my stepmom had received an amount of $10,000 from my dad. She was not happy with the amount, well, and she did not say anything yet until the lawyer was done reading. Well, he did not read for long, as he had said that every other thing which my father had left behind was mine, even though she would be my guardian who would oversee it till I became of legal age, and the legal age is 18, a year from now. Well, Madeline challenged what the lawyer had read, and she said that there was no way only I could get everything when I had a brother. She demanded that what was given to me be split in half between my stepbrother and I. And if the lawyer had said anything to support her, I would have just argued with both of them right there. The lawyer thankfully noted that my stepmother's demands could not be met, because there was no mention of Jackson in the will, but Madeline was not going to have it, guys. She claimed that my father had in mind, to include his son in the will once he came out of hospital care, and that he would only be honoring him by splitting my inheritance. The lawyer, however, noted that her ridiculous demands could not be met, and Madeline started to create a scene like the madwoman that she is. I could not understand the nonsense, so I asked her to quit wasting her time, because simply neither her nor her son, who by the way I don't consider to be my stepbrother, was going to get more than they had gotten. Madeline was obviously mad at me, but I did not give her the luxury of physically abusing me, so I just went into my room and shut the door. She asked the lawyer to leave the home and threatened to take the case to court, but the lawyer, before leaving, noted that the case would not stand a second in chance of winning in court. It's been 3 weeks since the whole incident, and Jackson no longer stays with us. I've not bothered to ask Madeline because I don't care anyways, but I believe that the only reason why she had brought the boy into our lives in the first place was that she could use him to get a share of my father's property in case she was not made the sole heir. I don't know what's become of that boy, but I'm sure that my stepmom is too selfish to adopt a child and raise a child based on her own money, because if she could, she would have done so a long time ago before getting married to my father. Just like I mentioned earlier, guys, my life is temporarily in her hands as she is the custodian of my property. This is something she used to make my life hell about recently. Madeline has slashed the monthly allowance which I got by 70%, and she's even subjected me to doing the chores at home. She's gotten herself involved in every aspect of my life, and the way that this is going, it'll not be long before I would need her permission to even breathe. This is something that I'm not used to, and I'm very sure that we will soon be having a series of drama between us. So right now, guys, I just need some advice, I really do, because I don't know how to handle this situation. Like, what am I even supposed to do now? Anybody who knows or maybe has an idea how I can handle this, please let me know in the comments. Update number 1. Hey guys, I'm back with an update. Well, first of all, it's been a few months since I've been living with my stepmom, and guess what? I've been indirectly thrown out of my own parents' home. Yep, that's right, thrown out. And I currently live with my grandparents. I recently have graduated from high school, and my friends and I plan to celebrate. We had agreed that we would go clubbing, and I needed some money. The only way that I was going to get some money from my stepmom was if I gave her a detailed account of what I needed it for, so there was no need to even lie. She's been making my life miserable for me ever since she's made the custodian of my inheritance, and though I already knew that she would not give me a dime to go party with my friends, I decided, you know what? I'll at least try. When I asked Madeline about it, well, she asked for the grades which I graduated with, and though I did not graduate the top of my class, I was not the last either, but that did not matter to Madeline. See, she claimed that my results was bad, and rather than thinking about creative ways in which I could make something useful out of my life, I was busy looking for money from her to go off and party. Madeline verbally tore me to shreds, and I stood without saying a word. I had tried to not get into fights with her ever since she became my custodian because it would only make my life more miserable for me than it already was. It was clear that she was not going to give me the money, but she could have just said so, rather than first tear me to shreds. She just declared that I was not going, as she won't give me a dime, and that's when my rebellious side really hit me. I told her that I was not going to miss the party for anything in the world, and she threatened to throw me out of the house if I went ahead to a party. I snuck out of the house on the night of the party, and my girls and I, we went really wild. It was during that night that I drove a car for the first time in my life. Well, I drove a car and it almost cost me my leg because I was involved in an accident. We were 4 ladies in the vehicle, and though none of us lost our lives, we sustained serious injuries. We were rushed to the hospital by the parents of one of us, and I was immediately sedated because of the pain I was going through. I woke up the next morning and I was asked about how to reach my guardian, and I didn't know what to do, because I simply did not want to tell my stepmom to be contacted, but as I had absolutely no other option, I called Madeline. Madeline did not even show up at the hospital for another 3 days, and when she did, she behaved just like I knew she would. My stepmom walked inside the ward where the nurses were, changing the bandages of my leg, and she just went ahead to scold me. The nurses tried to calm her down by noting that the main focus should be on my recovery, but Madeline said that whether I recovered or not was my business. She emphasized the fact that I had broken my leg because I was too stubborn to heed her instructions. My friend's father, the one who had rushed to the hospital, came into the ward and introduced himself to my stepmom. Madeline immediately began to tell him how sorry she was that I had damaged his car and put the lives of his daughters and the other girls at risk. She made it look like I was to blame for the entire thing, and I get that I was the one who damaged the car, but Madeline painted the picture of me being a bad influence to the other girls and claimed that I was responsible for the girls wanting to go out to the club in the first place. She said that she tried her best to make me take my life seriously ever since my father died, but I was actively frustrating her efforts. She, however, thanked the man for saving my life. Madeline did not say any kind things to me throughout the period while I was admitted to the hospital. On the day when I was about to be discharged, she came with a driver to pick me up, and as soon as I sat in the car, I knew that we were not going home. On our way there, she called me a dead weight that needed to be disposed of because she would not spend her precious time looking after me. Well, after about an hour's journey, the car finally parked at my grandparents' home in the countryside, and the driver began to bring out my things from the booth. I was obviously surprised, and my grandparents were surprised to see me walking with the aid of clutches, and after they had gotten us settled into the house, Madeline started afresh to verbally tear me to shreds. When she was done, she told my grandparents that the house where we lived was undergoing renovation, and it would not be conducive for me, so that's why she was bringing me over there temporarily to stay with them. Well, I knew it was nothing more than an utter lie because Madeline had clearly called me a deadweight. My grandparents welcomed the idea of nursing me back to health, and that's how my stepmom dumped me at my grandparents' place. I'm patiently waiting till I recover and turn 18 so that I can have my inheritance and this woman can be out of my life for good. Update number 2. Hey guys, I'm back with an update, so I know it's been too long since my last one, but guess what? My stepmother, Madeline, is currently in need of a deadweight, which she had discarded almost a year ago. I don't think that I stressed how hurt I was that my stepmother was pushing me out of my own house without me having a say about it. She claimed that the renovation only was going on as the time, but this was almost a year now, and yesterday was the first time she picked up her phone to reach out to me. Her call was not because she wanted to check on me. It was for her own personal interest, guys, can you believe it? I was surprised when my phone rang yesterday and I discovered that my stepmother was the one on the line. She asked how I was faring. Well, I'm completely whole and I just turned 18, so I told her I'm great. She then said that she was calling not just to check up on me, but to ask what I came to her aid for, as it was a matter of emergency. I was curious, just as you are now, to know what this matter of urgency was that she's talking about, even though I knew that I would not help her. Madeline said that she was recently involved in an accident herself and she suffered some broken ribs. I didn't sympathize with her, but that was me simply returning the favor. I rather asked how she had sustained the injuries. Madeline claimed that she was driving to work with a truck, ran into her on her own vehicle, and it was the last thing that she remembered. I knew right then and there that she was a liar, because I had visited my house where she stayed some days before her call came in and the place was locked. From what I gathered, my stepmother was living her best life. Some of the neighbors even said that she was currently on a trip with her lover, and I saw her social media pictures from one of the neighbors who was on her friends list. I did not immediately bash Madeline, even though I knew that she was lying. I just asked where I fit into this whole picture. Madeline began to sell me some sob story about how she needed to undergo some form of treatment which required a huge amount of money that she did not have. She said that since I had turned 18, I was the only one who had access to what my father had left for me, and she wanted me to pay for the treatment. As I noted, I did not plan on helping. She was insincere and did not deserve any form of help from me. Before giving my answer, I noted that I had a question and she gave me the go-ahead to ask look. Well, I asked her if she did not feel so ashamed to herself to ask a deadweight for money. Yep, that's right, I went there. Madeline said that all of that was in the past, but I was not buying it. See, I wasn't buying it at all. I asked her if she would have ever reached out to me, and this is a sincere question, if, well, she was not in a position where I could help her and she stayed quiet for a while. She then decided to play some emotional games using my late father, and she said that he would have desired peace between us more than anything else, and that's part of what she's trying to do. The more Madeline spoke, the more infuriated I became. I reminded her that my father had wanted when he was alive was just peace of mind, and she robbed him of that right the moment she moved in with us. I then went ahead to tell her that if her staying alive was hinged on me bringing the money that would be used for her treatment, then she could consider herself dead, because no dime of what I inherited from my father would get to her. It felt great asking her to, quote, go to hell before I cut the call. Madeline tried severely to reach me, but I refused to pick up. She then found a way to reach out to my grandparents, and I don't know what she told them, but they did their best to convince me to help my stepmom. I would do just as my grandparents have said, but before going ahead to give Madeline any form of assistance, I would need to confirm for myself if she was truly involved in an accident as she claimed. So right now, I'm on to that, looking into the whole thing about what all this fiasco is about. Well, I'll update you guys once I know what's up with that witch. Final update. I'm currently living in my house all by myself. After my grandparents had talked me into helping my stepmom, I decided to surprisingly pay her a visit. I did not give her any prior notice that I was going to show up at the house. I'd confirmed from the neighbors who noted that she was at home, and I sat down with my father's lawyer before going to see Madeline because I wanted to know the legal process involved in taking over everything that my father had passed on to me. Thankfully, nothing much was required since everything was already in my name. I showed up at the house and I could hear from the porch as my stepmother spoke to somebody over the phone. I listened as she told whoever it was that the reason why she endured every act of disrespect shown by me was that she wanted to use me as a cash cow and a maid. Well, I continued to listen as she laughed excitedly and just assured the person over the phone that it was only a matter of time before I gave in to the demands of my grandparents, who were already mounting pressure on me to make peace with her. Can you believe that? The reason Madeline wanted to, quote, make peace was because she was too broke to hire somebody to do her chores? I barged into the door in anger and she froze. I saw a few bruises all over her face, and I guess it was the result of the accident, but Madeline was fine beside that. Okay, I think there was a walking stick beside her, and I assumed she used it to walk. It didn't matter, though, because from what I had already heard, she had an ulterior motive, and it was not just going to allow me to sit back and let her make a fool of me. I told her. Her plan to turn me into a cash cow and her nurse had fallen ever before it stopped. She wanted to act like she had not said those words just a few seconds ago, but I wasn't buying it, guys. I told her, Madeline, to leave my house immediately, and I did not care if she walked or crawled out. I just wanted her out. Madeline still wanted to act like I was treating her unjustly, and I rushed at her in anger. The plan was to drag her out of the house, but to my surprise, Madeline stood up and overpowered me. Her legs were fine. The only real injury that she sustained from the accident was the bruises on her body, and I was the one who was thrown out of my house. Well, that was the last straw, because after that I just lost it. I went straight to my father's lawyer and I told him how my stepmother had beaten me up and thrown me out of my own home. He asked me to not worry, as we could build on Madeline's actions, and we involved the police almost immediately after, and we drove down to my house with them. Madeline was dragged out of my home in handcuffs and taken to the station where she was detained. because my lawyer had me report a case of battery to the police. Madeline was demanded to pay a fine for her crimes, and I have obtained a restraining order. All of this unfolded in my own home I grew up in, and, this was about 4 months ago at this point. All of this because of Madeline's greed. But, well, I'm way past that now. Madeline has not bothered me since I got a restraining order against her, and the last I heard, she's been working as a babysitter for some people in the neighborhood to make ends meet. I guess that's where her greed for my inheritance led her. As for me, I'm back to staying in my house, the one that I grew up in, and though I'm living alone, my grandparents visit me often, and I'm happy to have it this way. It's better to live alone than to live with an evil person. I'll be going to college next month, and I could not be even more excited about it. Lastly, I would just like to thank you all for the support you've shown me. Well, as all of you have suggested, it's helped me a lot. Your suggestions and support, it means so much. So, OP ends up having to get restraining orders against the stepmom. And I want to know if you guys were battling a stepmother like Madeline, who, by the way, did not seem to care about OP for the entirety of the story. And I'm not just talking about the ending of the story, I'm talking about when OP's father was alive. It just seemed like OP was there to neglect and be straight up neglected by the stepmother. So guys, I do want to know your thoughts, your opinions. I want to hear it all in the comment section down below, because this story, it had a lot of sad moments. I mean, OP lost both of the parents of the story, and then OP was the subject of borderline abuse for months, if not for years. Even though, at the end of the story, it looks like OP finally got a bit of justice, karma, revenge, whatever you want to call it. My name's Mr. Reddit, so I narrate stories like this every day. If you guys want to be a part of this, and by the way, I would love for you to be, hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell icon after the subscribe button, so YouTube will actually notify you and say, hey, there's another juicy story Mr. Reddito just released. Go check it out. Guys, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, and of course, remember, it's cool to be kind.